Lecture is continuing our conversation about how to set up advantageous environments for children's play. And so specifically today, we're going to talk about how to establish efficacious outdoor settings. So before we get into things that we should include in outdoor settings, I wanted to just share a little bit with you about sort of the history of playgrounds. It's a little section in your chapter in your textbook that I think is interesting for you to think about. So the pictures go in order. So top left, top right, bottom right, in terms of these 4 or these 5 bullets. But basically what we're looking at is in the early to mid 1900s, you would see things like in the black and white picture to the top left. So equipment was made out of steel. It was very large, big giant swing sets, big giant metal slides that burn the heck out of you as you try and climb down them. They were like these big geodome things. So when I was a child, a lot of playgrounds looked like this. They had this big steel early to mid 1900s kind of structures. Not very exciting, not a lot of green space, not shade. Again, made out of metal, very hot to touch in the hot months of the summer, so basically impossible to use any of the equipment. That was the manufactured appliance era. And then in the 50s and the 60s, this again was also part of my childhood, and the picture at the bottom left is actually the park in the neighborhood where I grew up. It used to be called Calle de Arbres Park, and then changed to Rocket Ship Park because that's what everybody called it, because it had this big giant rocket ship in it. It also had this like space Sputnik kind of structure next to it and weird animal forms. This was often referred to as the novelty era. People in the 50s and the 60s were very interested in space and space travel and things that were kind of like, you know, considered to be modern for the time. So sometimes you might run into these. They were often made out of that steel and were metal and all the things, but they were a little more fantastical than the very utilitarian manufactured appliance era. And then in the modular design era and the standardized era, they have the same picture because they kind of look the same on the surface. So basically in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, a lot of playgrounds started building these linked equipment climbing kinds of structures that you know, I'm sure that you still see around and about in your neighborhoods and were probably the kinds of playgrounds that you grew up with. What is different between the 70s and the 80s and the 90s is that there was more standardization of features and safety requirements and precautions and ADA compliance kinds of issues, although we still haven't done very well with that. But that's really the only difference between the modular design era and the standardized era. And supposedly in the 2000s, we're in the postmodern era where it is becoming more magical, green space, nature-oriented, free-flowing, movable equipment. But honestly, most of the playgrounds that I see still look to me very much like the standardized era with the linked climbing structures and pretty set patterns of things. They have more interesting things that are kind of pre-done, but definitely, you know, I don't see a lot of parks that have kind of this postmodern era look. The closest I can think is a park that's in my own current neighborhood. There's kind of the standard playground, and then encapsulated within the park are just kind of areas that have been left alone. So there's some old orange trees and like a little creek that comes through and an area with rocks and desert looking kinds of plants. So I guess in that sense, there is sort of nature that's now surrounded within the bounds of the park, which is not the way parks necessarily typically were once upon a time. Let's talk about some general considerations that we need to capture when we're creating outdoor spaces for children. The picture to the right, I'll talk about in a minute, but it is both talked about on this slide and it's a video on the next slide. But let's start with the first bullet. So one is absolutely everything has to be safe. So there are rules and regulations related. This is all about that standardized era. So there are rules and regulations for what play yards have to contain. There can't be places where children can be pinched or their heads can get stuck, or you have to make sure that chains aren't going to fall off when you're swinging on the swing, that there's an adequate fall zone. This means that whatever surfacing is underneath an area where you could be falling off has adequate cushioning. So I think a lot of times we think, oh, you should put grass under everything. Grass is actually tremendously hard when you land on it, and it is not meant to be a fall zone. So fall zone areas should be rubber chips, sand, something called pea gravel. It's like little teeny tiny pieces of gravel that are rounded. It actually has good cushioning. Wood chips, those are all adequate fall zone kinds of materials, and that's what needs to be under equipment. But things have to meet modern safety standards. That's so why we don't have those big metal things anymore, because they burn people, and that is not safe. It is the reason why that linked equipment that's part of the kind of postmodern and standardized eras came into being is because it's easy to create, and it's also easy to build something that includes various levels of challenge for children. So you can see in the picture to the top left of our graphic, there's a short slide and a taller slide, and there's usually like higher monkey bars and lower monkey bars and short stairs and taller stairs. And the idea here is that you give kids the opportunity to challenge themselves in a mildly risky but not dangerous way, and that there's something for every child to be able to do. If things are too easy, big kids are going to be dangerous. If things are too hard, then kids aren't going to be able to play. So you want to have things that are at various levels and provide challenges that increase over time for kids who would be using the play yard. You need to make sure that you have enough space. So this is less about a park, because typically parks have plenty of space, but this would be if you're creating an outdoor play area in a child care center or a school. There are regulations related to that, just like there are regulations related to indoor space. You have to have at least 90 square feet per child in the state of California, which is around the amount that research shows that is important to have so that children don't bump into each other and don't get aggressive with each other because there's too little space. But another positive is you don't want to have so much space that kids don't play with each other. So this is true indoors as well. I didn't mention this previously, but you want to have just the right amount of space. Too little, kids get aggressive and fight over materials. Too much, and children are just kind of hanging out doing their own thing. There's no environmentally guided encouragement for them to play together. So the right amount really does mean the right amount. If you are interested in a scale that helps you to evaluate whether you have provided a good outdoor environment or not, you can look up this preschool outdoor environment measurement scale. It's called POEMS. It came out of North Carolina, and it is a good tool to help us to think about all the things that we should include in our outdoor spaces. So finishing up on this slide and moving into the next one, we also want to make sure that spaces are inclusive, that they allow all children to be able to play there. So you can see some examples of good things and things that maybe aren't going to work so well. So sand is basically impossible for a wheelchair to get to. So we need to think about other kinds of surfacing. It's okay to have sand, but you need to have another way to get to the play climbing structure and different kinds of materials underneath that. We don't want to just have traditional swings. In the bottom left, you can see that there are swings for very young children, there are swings for older children, there's swings for kids in wheelchairs. like a merry-go-round, making sure that it's wheelchair accessible. This one is set low into the ground so that it makes it good for everybody. So we do not want a play yard that is has exclusion, which means that all the people who are typically abled get to be in the playground and all the people who are non-typically abled have to stay outside. Better, well, we also don't want to have segregated so that there is a play yard for people who are able-bodied and a play yard for people who are disabled. That would be segregation. So we're trying to avoid exclusion and segregation. Integration is better. This means that everybody gets to come kind of into the same playground, but there's sort of separate things in that playground for people with and without disabilities. Best to have inclusion, where everybody gets to be on the same pieces of equipment at the same time, because that equipment allows everyone to have access and everyone to participate in that activity. So on the next slide is a video that gives you some, sort of visual input and some specific things to look for when creating inclusive outdoor play spaces. Following up on the conversation from the first slide about the the kind of where things should head in the 2000s that probably haven't really been realized outside in terms of playground and play yard, things that we could include that would, provide better opportunities for children to engage in sort of deep play, sort of more exploratory play, cognitive play, all of the good stuff that we've been talking about for this semester. So there are some places that are leaning more into this. If you are ever out at College of the Desert in the Palm Desert area, I would encourage you to take a look at their play yard. They have a wonderful mud kitchen that they've included, and it is down and dirty and it truly is mud, but it is fabulous, very nature oriented. There's another wonderful school in Claremont that can turn on and off a little creek that runs through the play yard, sort of at will. So there are places that are trying to allow children more opportunities to truly be in nature when they're outside, because many of our modern playgrounds are outside, but they're not really tapping into sort of the wildness of nature in the same way that children might have the opportunity if they were not at a playground, but just outside in nature. So, some of the things that we talked about inside, so including more loose parts. You can see the child to the right here is, got things to dig with and things to scoop into and sticks and stumps and all kinds of things that are loose and flexible that can be used in ways that children want, rather than sort of that linked equipment that is set into the ground and is structured in a particular way and can never change. More of an emphasis on natural features. So there are some schools that actually just take place in forests. I would very much encourage you to take a look at the Kids Gone Wild Denmark's forest kindergartens. We do have some forest kindergartens here in the US, but they are really far and few between. Just really allowing children to not have a structured play space, but using whatever outdoor area is in the space that you live, taking advantage of all the natural features. And just in general, trying to make outdoor places feel more magical, feel like special places. When I was a child, there was a big tree on the house on the corner of my street, and its branches hung really, really low. So if you got underneath it, you felt like no one could see you. And I can remember just being in that space, feeling it was very magical, and watching cars go by and watching people go by from underneath my tree, feeling sort of secluded and hidden, but back in that green space and beautiful pine needles on the ground, and just affording children more opportunities to experience the magic of nature and being outside. So given what we just talked about, that there are safety requirements, that programs should, or excuse me, play yards should be accessible to children of all abilities, but that we still want to have things that children can move and touch and do, and the magic and nature and loose parts, how do we integrate those things? So I'm not saying that I have an answer. I'm just posing a question to you, sort of food for thought. How do we put together all these pieces, right? How do we put together these pieces of making sure everyone's included and making sure that things are reasonably safe enough, but still attending to magic, nature, and loose parts? So just food for thought for you. So as with your lecture on designing indoor spaces, the same is true of this lecture. It is a bit shorter than we typically have because there is the expectation that you're going to do this outdoor environment designing for learning lesson that is provided on the Virtual Lab School website. This time I gave you the school age one. The first go around on our indoor spaces lecture, I had you do 2 lessons from the preschool section. This is a lesson from the school age section of the website because I want you to understand that both are available to you on that website. So the Virtual Lab School is a great space for both our younger child teachers and teachers who teach slightly older children as well. So the lesson is available for you to use here. To wrap up, this is a great example of a kindergarten outdoor space that is in Japan. And in coming back to the question that I posed a couple slides ago, like how do we integrate all the things? How do we integrate magic and nature and safety and appropriate challenge and inclusivity? I think you'll find many of the elements that we talked about represented here in this outdoor kindergarten space.